As I mentioned in my episodes about Korean nightlife, Koreans are notorious for working the longest hours in the developed world. Naturally, most of personal activities tend to be pushed into late hours of the day, whether it be socializing with friends, hobby, or exercise. It's not uncommon at all to see bars and city parks alive with activities into late nights. But considering 1 to 3 in the morning is said to be when spirits get most active, at least according to traditional shamanism, this nocturnal modern lifestyle is bound to clash with the paranormal world occasionally. And that's the theme of today's episode. As a subcontext, I also noticed quite a few of today's stories are related to food, namely food seemed to attract ghosts. The idea that ghosts and spirits also need to eat is lost in the Western world, but it is not uncommon in East Asia. Typically, the memorial rituals for the dead in Korea, for example, call for a certain set of food. Even when we visit a tomb, we would bring food as an offering, like some fruit and alcoholic drink. Some would say without such offerings, spirits can go deprived even in death. And indeed, the ghosts of those who starve to death are said to be most malicious and tricky to deal with. Hunger was dreaded and yet inevitable for the most part of human history, and I think it is the case that fear of hunger had left its mark to the spiritual worldview. A couple of today's stories are in particular based on one related taboo about hungry ghosts, and I grouped them together. So, here are 6 allegedly true stories about spooky things happened at Nocturnal Outings. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by your host, Anthony. It's from my high school years. In my hometown Daegu is a river called Sincheon. At the time, I was obsessed with exercise, and I would jog along the river after the gym. One evening, some friends called me out to drink. Well, we were too young to drink, but as usual, where there's a will, there's a way. But even after 3 cans of beer, I could not skip the jogging and went to Sincheon River to finish my routine almost at 3 in the morning. Naturally, there wasn't a soul along the river walk, until I ran into a teenage girl standing under the lamplight. She was holding a bag of snacks, some sort of crisps in one hand, and a can of drink in the other. I was pretty surprised. What kind of girl was standing alone there at that time of the night? But I just ran past her. About 30 minutes into jogging, probably because of the beer I had, I felt more tired than usual. I sat myself down at the bench and put on my earbuds. I noticed somebody sitting down a couple of benches away. It was the same girl I saw earlier. She was eating the snack. But I ran all the way for good 30 minutes since I passed her. I felt more confused than scared. Would she keep following me should I run now? What if I crossed the river? Or should I rather confront her? Wouldn't she then turn into a monster and bite me or something? My mind was so busy that I didn't really hear the music that was banging right in my ears. Then I sensed something hitting my leg. I looked down, and on the ground were the snacks. The girl must have been throwing them at me. I looked towards her despite of myself. She was looking at me with one hand holding a fistful of snacks. Her dark black eyes had vertical pupils. I just jumped up and ran all my might, wailing like an animal. I could run 100 meters in 12 seconds in my heydays, and I kid you not, I must have run in that speed for good 2 minutes. Only then I turned to look, and she wasn't there anymore. Going breathless but still keeping the brisk pace, I carried on, constantly looking all around in case she should pop out from somewhere. In my ears were still the earbuds and the music on its max volume. But suddenly, above the loud music, I heard the sound of somebody chewing a crunch snack. I took out the earbuds and ran all the way home. I'm a uni student. My uni is a bit away from home and I had to take metro to get there. You all know what it's like in the rush hour metro train. I got tired of it and bought a used motorbike to commute. The previous owner warned about hiccups with the old bike, but I was happy enough that it met my tight budget. Now, that's already 5 months ago. Ever since I got the bike, I developed a new routine, or a sort of a hobby. Near my home was a former industrial district cut out by a railway. Naturally, there were hardly any traffic or passerby on fairly wide and straight road there, and almost every evening I went there to ride bike however fast and wild I liked. 3 weeks ago, I was once again there, riding the bike for a good half an hour. I felt a bit tired that evening, so I took a break. While looking for the drink I brought with in my backpack, the street lamp down the road went off and on. Well, the whole area was more or less deserted and run down by now, so I didn't pay much attention and took a sip from the bottle. The lamp kept blinking, and my eyes drew to it instinctively. And I saw something. Whenever the lamp went off, there was something whitish that looked like a billowing cloth. A faded old white cloth that disappeared when the lamp came on and appeared again when it went off. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was really seeing what I was seeing, and then gradually noticed that white thingy had long hair. Chills ran down my spine. I never expected I would find myself in the situation akin to the horror stories floating around the internet. All I could think was, run, run, run! And I ran. Things fell off from my backpack that I didn't zip up properly, but I didn't dare to stop to pick them up. I ran till I reached a convenience store on the bigger road. The store staff looked at me weirdly, but what did I care? After I caught some breath, I checked the backpack to see what I had lost, and found the flap of the bag somehow pulled out as if somebody tried to snatch it up. I waited in the convenience store till the dawn broke, and only when the sun rose, I went back to fetch my bike. On the way were my cigarette, bottle of drinks, and pencil case scattered on the ground. I picked them all up and reached my bike, which was still standing as I parked it. But I noticed long scratches on one side of its fuel tank, as if somebody scratched on it with long, sharp nails. It goes without saying that put an end to my nightly outing to the area. In my early 20s, my parents quite suddenly decided to move down to a countryside village. I stayed behind in the big town for my uni, but then when the time came to take military service, I was ordered to join the community defense force near the country village where now my parents were living because I was registered under their household. My parents' house wasn't even exactly in the village. They must have really wanted to get away from the civilization and bought a plot of land somewhere in the mountain to build their house. The point I'm making is that the house was really, really in a remote place. The work at the Community Defense Force was basically on 7 to 5 basis. To earn some pocket money, I worked at a local barbecue restaurant in the evening, which ended past midnight. And I commuted back and forth on my bicycle, which was all good, except when I had to go back home through the narrow one-lane road at the end of the day. Past the nearest village, there wasn't even a street lamp, and I had to ride in the dark. There were even several tombs at the foot of the mountain. It was frankly spooky, but I tried to take it as was. It happened occasionally, for example, that I felt my bike getting heavy as I passed one tomb, and then again lighter as I passed the next tomb. All right, I give you a free ride, just don't do anything funny to me, I thought. Whether I liked it or not, through that passage I had to commute every night, and it just made me feel better if I just assumed I was doing a service for something or somebody. One evening, my boss at the barbecue restaurant gave me a cut of cow liver that he had just butchered a cow earlier that day. Not my kind of thing, but I took it thinking my dad might enjoy it. The ride back home that night was particularly eerie. Trees have just gone bare in the late autumn, and the last lamplight before I entered the dark passage into the mountain shined through the bare tree branches, drawing a long shadow on the screen of foggy air. As I passed the first tomb on the way, I gave it a little glimpse, thinking if the invisible rider should join my journey again. Nope, my bike didn't get heavy. I sighed of relief and carried on, but then, what's that? An old couple were walking towards, hand in hand. As you know, country folks go to bed early. I'd been commuting every night for 3 months by then, but had never seen a soul wandering out and about at that time of the day. Are they really human? I couldn't help but wonder. Frankly, I didn't want to find out. No, I didn't even want to look at them. What if they had just empty holes for their eyes and mouth torn ear to ear, as in typical horror stories? How would I then conjure balls to carry on commuting back and forth? But despite my best effort, when I finally got to ride past them, I couldn't stop turning my head to have a quick look at them. Well, they looked pretty normal, if the expression looked a bit funny. It may sound funny, but there was certain longing or envy as they looked at me. About 10 seconds later, I took one last look back, which I probably shouldn't have done. The old couple had changed the direction and now were following me. I stepped on the bike pedals like mad. I had to try my utmost not to look back again. How could I bear it should I find them right behind me or something? Fortunately, I made it to home. Seeing the family dog not barking, I assumed nothing had followed me. I popped the cow liver in the fridge and went straight to my room. I turned on the computer and entered the usual chat room to find the girl I'd been regularly chatting for some time. Having been unexpectedly spooked, this normal nightly routine would help to bring some sense of normality back too. I was describing what I just saw to the chat buddy with a bit of exaggeration, but then footsteps from the outside. My parents were all in bed. There couldn't be anybody around this house and nowhere in the forest. The footstep came closer and again away as if somebody was wandering up and down. And then it got once again closer and closer and stopped right outside my window. I intensely listened out, but it didn't move away again. Had I withdrew the curtain and looked outside, would I have found something there? But I didn't. I didn't want to know. I recited the Lord's Prayer and put my Bible next to my pillow and went straight to bed. I quitted my evening part-time soon after because I could not dare to ride through the route at midnight again. I would have gone mad had I run into the old couple one more time. In relation to this story, I coincidentally found another story about an old taboo. I believe there's strong correlation between these stories. In the old days, most people walked. Especially if you didn't live in a big town, walking was the only option there was. Walking through the hills, forest, and mountain in the pitch dark is bound to conjure fear in most people's mind, and various taboos were born from the fear. One of the most common such taboos I find is not to carry meat should you walk back home at night. I find it mentioned up and down the country regardless of the province, and I'll recount one archetypal story regarding the taboo said to have taken place in the early 70s. The country was still poor, and especially in the countryside, the life followed more or less the traditional way. One day, our protagonist, let's call him Kwang-soo for the sake of the story, went to the market in town to sell his cow. The deal went better than he thought. With the money in his pocket, Kwang-soo bought this and that for his family and treated himself a drink too. Towards the closing hour of the market, he found a butcher selling leftover chunk of a pork on sale. How could he miss such a bargain? Kwang-soo dangled a chunk of meat tied up with a rope made of straw to his backpack and finally headed back home in his drunken pace. Dusk sets quickly in mountainous regions. The mountain he had to go over to get back home was already shaded deep in the dark, but that was the only way. There wasn't any street light, nor he had a torch. Moonlight was all Kwang-soo could rely on. As he walked carefully step by step, he heard faint bustling noises, occasional footsteps, and even low voices mumbling something. He wasn't alone in the dark passage through the mountain, but he couldn't see anything. By and by, he reached the top of the mountain, and rest of the way was going to be quicker and easier. As he was catching his breath, he was startled by a voice from his back.
"Hi, mister. I see you got a chunk of meat."
Kwang-soo stopped himself looking back to see who it was because he remembered it was a taboo to look back to a random calling at night.
Yes, I'm on my way back from the market,"
Kwang-soo mumbled without looking.
"I couldn't go to the market. I would really like some meat for myself. Why don't you sell me some part of it? I'll pay,"
the strange voice said. Kwang-soo hesitated, but there was certain desperation in that voice which he couldn't easily dismiss. Yet he still didn't want to look back to deal with a guy, so in the end simply said,
"Oh, all right. Meat is hanging to my backpack. Take as much as you need." "Thank you. And don't worry, I'm paying for it,"
the voice said. But then Kwang-soo noticed a shadow from the moonlight. He could see his own shadow, but there was nothing behind him. Kwang-soo panicked, but before he could react, He felt the pull of somebody snatching up the meat, leaving his backpack lighter. All the while, he didn't see any shadow of the mystery buyer. Kwang-soo ran the rest of the way. He managed to arrive home safely, but couldn't sleep the whole night, worrying what that encounter should signify. He sought the village shaman first thing in the morning and explained the incident previous night. Shaman suggested to go back to the spot where the encounter took place, so they climbed up to the top of the mountain. And there, they found the chunk of meat still tied up with a straw rope, turned blue and rotten. And next to it was some old bank notes.
"Consider yourself lucky," Shaman said. "That must have been the ghost of a guy who starved to death. So why were you carrying meat in the middle of the night?"
Midnight is the usual time for lost souls to wander around, but that mountain was particularly dangerous because it was the scene of many deaths during Korean War, the shaman explained. These wandering souls are all hungry and would get especially triggered by fresh flesh. If you refuse to hand it over, they might do you harm, or even if you agree to give it up to them, they might still haunt you because they'd think you are easy. It's a story I heard from a friend. She knows a couple who's been in a long-distance relationship. One evening, the guy wanted to see his girlfriend so much that he drove all the way to her place. But it was a weekday night and he had to come back late at night. He didn't even have dinner, so made a stop at a convenience store to pick up a quick bento box. His initial idea was to eat it at home, but with the food sitting next to his seat, he could not ignore his hunger anymore. He already knew there was some sort of factory plot on the way, so he parked his car there. There was not a single light in the buildings around, probably not strange considering how late an hour it was. He opened the window to let the fresh night air in and digged in his well-deserved dinner. Then, from his peripheral vision, he sensed something moving. He looked up and saw something crouching down behind a bush of tall weeds. A small mountain wasn't far away from there, and the man just assumed it might be a wild animal, a water deer, or possibly a boar. He had a few more bites from his bento box and looked up. And somehow, that thing seemed to be closing in bit by bit. Now closer, he realized it had a bit too long and slender limbs to be a deer or a boar. It now looked more like a person, except its skin looked too dark in the moonlight. Might be a foreign worker with a darker skin then, he wondered. A strange car parked there might have alarmed him, he thought, and hurried up finishing his food. And then he unwittingly looked his side at the half-opened window, and there was a face of the person looking in. The face had no features, no eyes, nose or mouth, just blank blackness. The man screamed and threw his bento box at the face and quickly drove away from the plot. He was so shocked that he rang up his girlfriend to report what just happened. And indeed the girlfriend remembers it well to this day, how he screamed on the phone.
I saw a ghost!
He didn't know at the time, but the factory wasn't just off work for the night, but was already totally out of business and was abandoned. Apparently the locals in the area had been reporting weird black figure roaming around at night. Fortunately, the whole plot is now redeveloped as a shopping mall. I don't have a religion. I always had more interest in science, physics, and astronomy in particular. But now I know there are things that science cannot yet fully prove, nor my usual logic can fully understand. When I was 18, I had a year older girlfriend. We often spent time together at a university library, studying and reading books. That night too, we came out of the library late at night. It wasn't a test or festival time, and the night campus was virtually empty. But street lamps were bright and plenty, shining the empty parking lots and park areas pretty bright. We picked up some snacks from a vendor and went to sit on the bench behind the library building. Girlfriend was flipping through her phone and I was just eating the chips absent-mindedly. Then abruptly, I froze. Because I saw a girl. A girl who wasn't there just a second ago. Not a meter from my girlfriend, who was focusing on her phone, was standing a young girl with her head tilted to her side. I think our eyes interlocked for a few seconds. I could not think or move, until my thought finally reached that she couldn't be a human. I dropped everything, grabbed girlfriend's hand, and just ran all the way into the library. Girlfriend was baffled and angry about my sudden weird behavior. Only when I was sure we were safe and caught my breath, it all came back to me. The image of the girl, so clear and detailed like a photograph. "Didn't you see?" I said. "See what? What? You're scaring me," girlfriend said. "Listen, I just saw a young girl right in front of you. Right in front of you, staring at me. She had a long hair coming down to her waist, in a jumper and a knee-length skirt. Oh, but she had no legs. And her eyes, in that pale face, were all black without white." I think she sensed I wasn't joking, but also didn't know what to respond. About a week later from the night, my girlfriend met her friends at the lobby of the library. The big window there looked over the park at the rear, and one of her friends said, "You know what? You see the bench over there? I saw a ghost just last night." Girlfriend noticed it was the very bench we were sitting on the other night. Without mentioning me and what I saw, she asked her friend to describe what the ghost looked like. "It was a little girl, long black hair, and was in a jumper and a skirt. She just stared at me and her eyes were all black," the friend said. Apparently, we saw the same ghost at the same spot. Since the incident, I did see a few more ghostly figures, but maybe because it was the first time, the image of the girl is still clearly imprinted in my memory. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Having read and narrated hundreds of ghost stories now, frankly, it's not a surprise at all that a ghost can appear anywhere and at any time. But the taboo about food and ghost was something I wasn't aware of. I think I should try and dig into some of such traditional taboos that are lost in time and make a dedicated episode sometime. That would be fun. If you enjoyed my work, please leave it a comment and a like, and please consider subscribing to my channel to help it grow. If you'd support me more directly, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link's in the description. Buy Me a Coffee supporters will get an early access to my new videos. Thank you. Days getting shorter and shorter where I am. Maybe I should try my luck and go out for a night walk? Until the next, stay safe and take care.